Good afternoon and welcome to our initiative dialogue on election 2020, the moral and public obligations of winners, losers, and the rest of us. I'm thrilled you're with us. We had more than 1,200 RSVPs. It's sort of an odd dialogue we're doing. Here we are a week before the election, and we're not focused on who should win or why. We're focused on what winners and losers and the rest of us ought to do in the middle of what is a pretty angry and bitter election. This is the 16th dialogue our initiative has done since Georgetown shut down. We've reached almost 50,000 people. With the help of the Democracy Fund and others, we've done 20 Faith in the Faithful dialogues, which this is a part of, reaching more than 17,000 people. But we've never done one like this, in that we're talking not about public policy, not about sort of what's going on in the parties, who's going to vote for whom. We're trying to focus on the potential crisis that could come with an election that divides the country and which our leaders may act in ways that stress our democracy, threaten our democracy, and undermine the common good. Thank you for joining us on YouTube and Twitter. This is co-sponsored by the Georgetown Institute on Politics and Public Service, and it's supported by our friends at the Democracy Fund. It is being recorded and captioned and will be posted later for your friends who haven't seen it. You can join us at hashtag 2020 moral obligations, and you can submit questions at the email that is flashing across the bottom of the screen. So we're bringing together a week before the election respected leaders to assess the moral responsibilities and the public obligations of candidates, of campaigns, of our public institutions, and our citizens to protect democracy and to promote the common good at a time when we're deeply divided, where a candidate says he may not accept the results of the election. And lots of us are really angry, concerned, frustrated by our politics. And so we want to ask what should be done and what should not be done as we approach election day, election week, maybe election month. How do we knit a country back together again? We're really excited about the people that have joined us today. Washington is full of people who think they know everything and are often wrong. I was the one who said that Joe Biden would come in 4th in New Hampshire, 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, and then would sweep his way to the Democratic nomination, a centrist taking on a party that's moving left. That was my prediction. We can't find the tape where that is. And I was also the one who said that President Trump would host the swearing in of his 3rd Supreme Court justice a week before the election and 3 weeks after he was airlifted to the hospital for COVID. That's out there as well. So the people we have here today are not pundits. We're not making predictions. We're asking what we can do, what our leaders need to do, what our parties need to do, what our institutions need to do, and what we need to do to advance the common good and protect our democratic institutions. And Joe Goldman is going to lead off. He's the president of the Democracy Fund. Christine Emba is an opinion columnist and editor for the Washington Post. Cherie Harder is the president of the Trinity Forum and a veteran of the George W. Bush White House. Dennis McDonough is a professor of practice. I'm not sure what that is, but is at Notre Dame, a small football university in the Midwest. And he is in his car in Minnesota because he's trying to deliver the electoral votes in Minnesota, my home state, for his preferred candidate, Joe Biden. Thanks, Dennis, for joining us. And then Michael Steele was lieutenant governor of my state. He ran for the Senate. He was chair of the GOP, and he now is the leader of the Lincoln Republicans. This morning, I read a headline in the Associated Press, which says 1,000 faith leaders call for free and fair elections. And National Association of Evangelicals, the Poor People's Campaign, Catholic bishops, lots of nuns. Kim and I signed it. And what they did is we need four things, they said. Free and fair elections where people can vote without intimidation, count every vote, and accept the results. Don't misrepresent the results for your own partisan purposes. And a real transfer or continuation of power to advance. Let me begin with Joe, because that statement was organized by the Democracy Fund, by your colleague and our friend, Chris Crawford. First of all, I want to thank you for your support of our initiative and your understanding that faith-based institutions can really contribute to democracy and the common good and promoting justice. My question for you is, why is the Democracy Fund focused on this? What is at stake at this moment as we approach this election?
Thanks, John, and thanks for hosting this important conversation. Really glad to be here. So look, our democracy has been unhealthy for some time, but I really worry that it's nearing a breaking point from which our country simply could not recover. At the Democracy Fund, we've been doing everything we can to try to uphold the integrity of this election, because for us, the alternative is just unthinkable. Perhaps no one needs to be reminded of this, but think about the conditions under which we're conducting this election. We're living through the worst economic crisis in our lifetimes, the worst public health crisis in recent memory, and during the most significant social unrest that we've seen since the 60s and 70s. The American public is deeply distrustful of our political institutions, our political leaders, and each other. And both sides see the outcome of this election in existential terms, right? If the other side wins, it's the end of the republic. And all of this is happening amidst a sea of misinformation. At a time when we're trying to conduct an election that is totally having to reinvent how the process works in order to ensure that people can vote safely, with millions of people voting by mail and election administrators having to stand up new systems with too little time and too few resources. Together, these conditions, to me, they feel like the kindling that, if the wrong match is lit, could be very hard to put out. This summer we conducted polling to try to understand how people are thinking about our politics today. And, one of the most worrying things I saw was that more than a quarter of Democrats and Republicans refused to say that violence would be unjustified if the other side wins. Right? This is the context of this elections. And I just think it's absolutely vital that we all do everything we can to ensure that we can conduct a free and fair election that has integrity with the American people.
Joe, that's a very stark picture. Pandemic, racial reckoning, economic collapse, and intense, angry polarization. What is the Democracy Fund? What doing? What should our leaders be doing? What should the rest of us be doing as we look at this challenge?
Yeah, look, I mean, the most important thing is that everyone votes, right? And I think we all need to make sure that our friends, our colleagues, our family members have a plan to vote if they've not already done so. I think now is a time that, honestly, one of the things that we can all do is thank our local election administrators and the poll workers who are really the first responders of our democracy, doing thankless work under tremendously hard conditions. Coming up this coming Monday on November 2nd will actually be what's called Election Hero Day, in which, across the internet, we're going to try to celebrate these first responders for our democracy, and remind folks that the people who run our election they're our neighbors, they're our community members, and they deserve our thanks. Folks can go to electionheroday.org to join that celebration. But, above and beyond anything else, this is a moment we all need to remember that what's important is getting it right. And if getting this election right takes a little bit longer than it normally would, that's okay. I think we all need to be patient, and we need to support the process to let it play out so that we can have a democracy, right? I think you're on mute, John.
Thanks. You're muted are the two most common words in my life. Most people are very grateful when I'm muted, but occasionally it gets in the way. The Democracy Fund is doing so much in so many areas. On our resources page are some of the remarkable pieces, both analysis, but also suggestions for what can be done. And I encourage people to take a look at that. Dennis, let me turn to you. Joe, I know you have to go. I want to thank you for your participation in this. Dennis, you are Democracy in Action. You're in a rental car somewhere in Minnesota, St. Peter, I think, trying to turn out the vote, trying to persuade people to vote for someone you know and respect. But you're not just a partisan. You've worked on the Hill. You've been Deputy National Security Advisor. You've been a White House Chief of Staff. You've been through a transition. I want to ask you about the transition, but first I want to ask, what, from a national security perspective, what is at stake? What are other countries watching and thinking as they see us so divided, and as we have the potential for an election that could tear us apart even more?
Well, thanks so much, John. It's a real honor to be with you today, and I want to just say also what an honor it is to appear with my colleagues. And I am in Minnesota, and I am in St. Peter. As I told you, I'm behind enemy lines here, very close to St. Olaf, which I think you know is a Lutheran Lutheran college. So they keep an eye on us Catholics as we get close to town here.
Yeah.
Look, I guess I want to say I want to do two things. One, I want to double down on what Joe said, which is the most important defense of our institutions, and most importantly, our institution of the vote, is that we all exercise it. And so what I'm seeing here, and I think what we're witnessing, at least if the reports that I'm reading in the newspapers and so forth are correct, is a surge of enthusiasm for the vote, notwithstanding the very critical limitations and challenges that you and Joe just talked about. So we are seeing significant turnout. Importantly, we're seeing a lot of turnout, as I understand it, among younger voters, including students at Georgetown and at Notre Dame and places like St. Olaf and St. John's here in Minnesota. So that's a vote of enthusiasm for the concept of democracy. Second is, as Joe underscored, but as we've witnessed here in Minneapolis and in Minnesota over the course of the summer, there remains real, concrete impediments to the right to exercise the vote for our fellow citizens of color. And it's just not an acceptable set of circumstances for the most admired democracy in the world. And so I think it's really important that we not only exercise the vote here between now and next Tuesday, but we also not lose attention to the very real challenges that come from the underlying inequity in the context of the American experience, and that Congress and the next president, whether that's a re-elected President Trump, or as you indicated, my preferred outcome, a President-elect Biden, is focused right out of the bat, right out of the box, early next year, on election reform. That's the second point. Third point is, yeah, our enemies and our allies are watching this experience in the United States. I'm of the view that they'll be impressed by the enthusiasm and the turnout that we witnessed between now and the end of the day on Tuesday. And hopefully there won't be continued efforts, as we saw even last night, unfortunately, at the Supreme Court, to try to close the door to the free exercise of the vote and the counting of those votes. But I think the world will be surprised, and I think Americans will be proud of what we do, provided we get to the kind of election reform early next year that I just talked about. So yeah, our allies and our enemies are watching this, John. There's real national security concern, but it also means there's a great opportunity for us to underscore what America is all about.
I think you're the only one on this call who's actually been through a presidential transition. It must have been something to be a fly on the wall, or actually not a leader in that effort. What are the elements, no matter if there is a transition from Trump to Biden, we'll talk about the other, a continuity. What are the elements that are necessary for the good of the nation in a presidential transition?
Well, the most important element is a sense of cooperation and collaboration, including from the sitting government. The person who I hold in highest regard on this is Josh Bolten, who was the outgoing chief of staff for the outgoing Bush administration in 2008 and 2009. He tells a very powerful story about how President Bush told him to make sure that, in as much as this transition was happening in the context of a period when we were under threat from here at home from forces outside the country, that he wanted to make sure it was a smooth transition. We then sought to emulate that when I was chief of staff in 2016 under President Obama's direction, to make sure that we conducted the transition as professionally, transparently, and clearly as President Bush and Josh insisted it be done in 2008 and 2009. So what are the elements of that? Cooperation, first and foremost, transparency, a recognition that a well-functioning transition is part of the job description of a president. That's not something that he hands off to somebody else, but the president has to send a very clear signal to his team that this is a part of the job to make sure it gets done. And then lastly, it requires cooperative relationships at all levels of the government, whether those are political appointees who are outgoing, or whether those are professional government officials who are there and will stay there with the new team. It just requires those kinds of relationships to function well. And so we at Notre Dame, we're putting together a transition index, John, with a bunch of our students, where we're gonna try to track in real time whether that's happening. Are the statutory requirements being lived up to? And is there a quality of the transition of the type that we would expect, especially at a period when the country's in the midst of a pandemic? We're seeing massive economic dislocation as a result.
Thank you, Dennis. Very helpful. Cherie, you've done a whole bunch of stuff in your life. You've been in the Bush White House. You served President George W. Bush and the First Lady. You worked on the Hill, as Dennis did. You worked at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Most people may not know that you now run the Trinity Forum, which is, I guess, sort of a faith-based think tank which tries to renew society by helping leaders renew themselves, be people of character, bring out the best in each other. Yesterday, you had a terrific conversation with Robbie George and Cornel West, and the title was Preserving Democracy Amid Deep Divisions. Given all you've done and the places you've done it, how do we, a week out from an election, preserve democracy amid deep directions?
Well, it's a great question, John. I should start by just thanking you for inviting me on. It's great to be with you and the other colleagues on this call. It's an incredible group, and just appreciate the hospitality. Yeah, that is the question before us. One of the things that Cornel West and Robbie George discussed last night is just how corrosive the effects of tribalism are on democracy and the what's called effective polarization that we find ourselves in the midst of, where unfortunately our fellow citizens are so deeply divided, and not along lines purely of principle or policy. There have been many studies that have shown that if anything, the various tribes are becoming more ideologically and politically incoherent and inconsistent. So it's less about fidelity to principle or policy, and more, unfortunately, about fear and loathing of the other side that is uniting people together in warring tribes. And that's a situation that's affecting not only what we see as right or wrong or good or bad, it's also driving fundamental confusion about what is true or false. There have been recent studies that show that a big chunk of Republican voters are believers in at least some aspects of the QAnon conspiracy theory. There have been other studies that have showed that large segments of both partisans in both parties think the country would be better off if large chunks of the other side just up and died. So when you're talking, as we are, about the future of democracy, I think it's an open question as to whether, the stakes for survival or thriving when you have large chunks of people who, one, think the country would be better off if their fellow citizens died, and two, simply don't agree on what has actually happened, what is true and false. Agreeing on sort of a basic sense of reality. And so I think some of the challenges before us over the next week and over the next few years is finding ways to reaffirm the character of our country. The fact that we are a nation of laws, that there is a sense of e pluribus unum, that our diversity is united around certain principles that unite us and direct us, as opposed to a populus pluribus that essentially disregards the unum. And I think another important point in all this is that it's not only are we a nation of laws and founded as such, but that there are important norms that undergird those laws. I forget who it was who said that civilization essentially rests on obedience to the unenforceable. And there are a lot of norms that have undergirded the functioning of our republic that I think are very important to reaffirm and restore going forward. I think you might be muted again, John.
I said it would be twice. I think the over-under is gonna, the over is gonna win. One of the things I read was that one of McDonough's rules are process protects us. You, Cherie, you at the Trinity Forum focus on leaders. What should we expect from our leaders on election night, on the day after? Not half the country, but 40% of the country's really going to be mad. How do our leaders deal with that, address that, and help us move forward? You focus on character of leaders. What kind of leadership do we need now?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. At the risk of oversimplifying things, I think it was Max Dupree who said that the basic responsibilities are of a leader to set a vision, help define reality, rally the troops, and say thank you. And I think all of those are sort of important in terms of dealing with this election. There should be a vision for America that is positive. There should be an acknowledgement of reality and an adherence to the law. I think the most basic thing we can expect from our leaders is that they will fulfill the oath of office that they affirmed, that they will obey and protect and promote the law. And that means stepping down if they have been defeated, and doing so in a peaceful way. And also, just as we were talking about earlier with norms, and as Dennis was talking about, in a way that is good for the country, that facilitates a smooth and orderly transition. But I think an important point as well is, part of being a leader is to to bring out the better angels of one's nature, to push back against fear, against the distortions of perception and behavior that we are all prone to as fallen creatures. You know, it was FDR who said we have the thing we most have to fear is fear itself. Fear has been driving a lot of unfortunate, even pathological behavior in this election and in this season. I think it's an important part of any leader to say what is true, to abide by the law, to push back against fear, and to help unite a fractured people.
Thank you very much. Michael, Cherie was sharing some important ideas in Latin. And you were a seminarian, I was a seminarian at one point. I think the church is lucky that we're not priests, so I speak for myself. But I don't know if you could figure out what she was saying, but the idea that we're one people, and you have been a symbol of that. You were the first African-American statewide elected official in Maryland, my home state, lieutenant governor. You were the first African-American chair of the GOP. You picked fights with Speaker Pelosi and Rush Limbaugh, which I think gets you some credit. You ran for the Senate, so you won elections and you lost elections. You went to Georgetown. That was a big plus. You're a graduate of Archbishop Carroll. And now, as a committed Republican, you've joined the Lincoln Project, which is trying to convince other Republicans to vote against the Republican nominee. I was watching TV the other night, and who should appear on my screen but Michael Steele casting his vote in Baltimore. And in that, you warned us against, quote, an outlaw president clinging to power and defying the will of the people. Did you have anyone in mind? And what needs to happen for people across party lines to accept the results and begin to move forward?
Well, thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to be back with you and to share this platform with such an esteemed group of friends and colleagues. And Cherie, you really just kind of laid it out there. I love the Latin. Yes, I followed it all, and took me back in time a little bit. This idea of e pluribus unum is a powerful one. It ties directly into what I think are the three most important words in all of our founding documents, and that is we the people. And when you put the two of them together, it begins to define what America is and what America isn't. And I think in this period, we have lost sight of what America is and have begun, not just under the current president's tenure, but have begun to reimagine and reshape America into our own self-image, moving away from the very things that were just mentioned about the power of out of many, one. When it's just many, it's chaos. When it's just do as you want, roll it however you want, it's inconsistent with founding principles and ideals. So for me, that became a very important jump off point as I looked to what would occur over the next 4 years back in 2016. Knowing the central player as I do, having worked with the president in the private sector, I knew that this was not going to be a pleasant ride. But like many, certainly within the party at the time, held out hope that the office, the gravity and the weight of the office, the gravity and the weight of this powerful concept of we the people and its underlying force of out of many one would shape and to some degree change the approach and the thinking about this service to the country. I was wrong. And I think a lot of Americans were wrong. that in fact, what we've seen happen is one personality reorienting the thinking, the culture, and the context of America around self. What's in it for me? What's my Twitter feed look like? What is my tribe? And to the extent that there is any, oneness, it's tribalism, which Joe very eloquently spoke to. So for me, this is a very powerful moment in our history, and it really goes to this idea of the character of our leaders reflect the character of the people. Because our government is established the way it is, that the people are the government, not the institutions, not the buildings, not the presidency, not the Congress, not the courts, not our county executives, not our governors. It is us at the end of the day. We are the ones who actually get to call the shots. And I think this moment reminds us in very powerful ways why that's important and why it should remain important. And you just heard a lot of that mentioned. Dr. King, which was an animating point for me, put it this way: our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Character matters. This country matters. Leadership matters. And we as citizens can't be silent about those things that matter because America matters.
Thank you, Michael. Christine, you've never been a White House Chief of Staff. You haven't run yet. I hope you do run for something. You're an opinion writer at the Washington Post. You worked at other places. You hold a degree from Princeton. I was looking over my clips of you, and what is white privilege a while ago. If God cancels people, we can too. Why millennials are skipping church and not going back, and is God becoming nonpartisan? You're the only person I know who's written for the National Catholic Reporter and First Things. Maybe you're a symbol of somebody who reaches out to both sides, and that's what we need. You're also a lot younger than the rest of us on this call, no offense. What do you want our leaders to do in this last week on Election Day and what follows? And what should the rest of us be doing? We talked in general principles. What are the steps that we ought to be taking? What do you, as somebody who thinks deeply and writes clearly about these issues, what are you looking for and what are you afraid of over the next several weeks?
Well, first of all, I have to say thank you for that exceedingly generous introduction, and also for inviting me to be part of this discussion with experts from all around, with people with real experience in making and setting policy and being in government. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm glad that we are actually discussing these questions in advance of the election because we do need to be prepared. I think first I have to qualify my answer to what do we want our leaders to do with the note that, unfortunately, as Michael has alluded to, what we want from our leaders is probably different from what will actually happen based on the leader that we currently have in office. So in some sense, that actually means that we have to be the leaders. We as individuals will have to lead in our families, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, online, on Twitter, on social media, in the days to come and after the election as we wait for votes to be counted. So I would address these thoughts, yes, to our leaders, not just the president, but also opinion leaders, thought leaders, others working in government, but also each of us. And I think that the most important thing that all of us will need to do or try to do in the coming days, and especially after the election, if the vote count takes longer than anticipated, note it's pretty clear that it will probably not be done the first day or even 2 to 3 days after November 3rd. So we probably will be in for some waiting. What we need to do is speak to calm. We need to speak against fear. Joe from Democracy Fund already noted the idea of this existential threat that people are feeling. There are incredible amounts of fear in the air. You know, other colleagues of mine at the Washington Post have been out and interviewing voters in different states. There's one incredibly alarming interview in which a woman said that if Joe Biden was elected, believing that he is part of this false QAnon conspiracy, that she would take her kids and go into the garage and turn on the car and wait for the exhaust to kill them because she was so afraid of what the country would look like. And then on the other hand, we have, you know, reports from those who want Joe Biden to win, but are afraid that there will be another 4 years of Trump, desperately looking for ways to leave the country, haranguing their far off relatives to see if they can somehow get citizenship somewhere else because they believe that the country will implode and go downhill incredibly fast if they don't get their preferred outcome. The world is not going to end, I think, if our preferred candidate on either side does not win. And we should not cause the world to end through our fears, through acting on uncertain information, or in fact, moving too fast. So we need to be shoring up trust in institutions as they work over time. Everybody should try to vote, and everybody should also wait and trust that their votes will be counted, and believe that, you know, we can also believe the votes when they are counted. There are enough conspiracy theories and fears swirling around. We don't need to be adding to this information, or this misinformation, I should say. And then while we wait, as much as possible, we should be working to set our enmity aside. This is not going to be the moment to fan flames or to continue to cheer and agitate for your candidate. At a certain point, the votes are already in. Fanning the flames will do more harm than good. It's too late to change the outcome. What we need to do is sit tight and wait for the answer. Muted.
Yeah, that was both profound and concrete. Dennis, let me lead off with you with two questions, and I'd welcome everybody else jumping in. One is, and this is a question a couple people have already asked, are our institutions strong enough? We're talking about the threat. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the institutional strengths to weather this? And how do we stand those institutions up? And then just bluntly, you're in Minnesota working for Vice President Biden. If he wins as you want him to, what are his responsibilities? What are his obligations, knowing that the country is really going to be divided in the aftermath of the election? So are our institutions strong enough? How do we support them? And secondly, what are the obligations of your friend and your candidate if he wins to heal the nation?
Thanks, John. Let me just say to start how impressed I am by Christine and also by Cherie and by Michael. It's I reiterate, an honor to be on this forum with them. Are the institutions strong enough? I think the answer to that is yes. I think a really interesting thing that happened this course of these last 2 weeks is how, now a bunch of reporters have written about this. This is not my original thought. I do think the New York Times reporting on how a lot of mainstream media took a pass on these putative stories about a hard drive purporting to be from Hunter Biden. I thought it was really interesting to see how mainstream media took a hard look at that story and really took a pass. I think that's evidence of the way the fourth estate is really taking a hard look at and learning lessons from this new period all of us are in of digital media, profusion of digital information. You go back to, for example, the North Korea hack of Sony and how that material was treated, the 2016 hack of private individuals and how that by the Russians, and then how that information was treated. Last 2 weeks is a much different reaction by the press, and I take that to be a sign of that institution being stronger, better, having learned important lessons. I also think it'd be really important to see how Congress carries out its oversight functions on things like the transition when we get to that transition. I think it's really important that Congress stay on top of this, especially given the pandemic and the economic dislocation from it. Third thing I want to say, John, is I don't want to give a lot of truck to the ideological differences. We don't know how the country's going to feel on Wednesday morning or Thursday morning or Friday morning when the results are all in. Because there's a scenario where there's a very strong repudiation of that kind of activity and a strong vote in favor of the kind of unity that the vice president is campaigning on in the close here. And that then brings me to the last point, which is, what is the vice president's obligation? Well, his obligation is to continue to be clear about how he will conduct himself, both as a candidate, but then as a president-elect, and then president if he gets there. And I've taken great heart from both the language he's using about being not a president for Republicans or Democrats, but a president for all Americans, irrespective of whom they voted for. But I also take some, now I'm not going to, I don't know any data on this, but I take some confidence and optimism from the fact that having been not only involved in politics as long as he has been, but very deeply involved in this campaign, that he sees something in the country that makes him want to close on that argument. I think he the shoots of an argument and of enthusiasm for that kind of outcome that should give us confidence. So are the institutions strong enough? Yes. And what should Biden do? I think Biden should be Biden. Just as the answer to the challenges that ail America right now means Americans should be American, and we should draw on the best in us to get around this corner, to get to the election reform I talked about before, for the reasons I talked about it, and then get on with governing. Hey, John, I took the over. I want you to know.
I know you have to go. One last question, then I'm going to come back to each of our friends. Are our institutions strong enough? What should candidates do? And then this third question, what should people of faith do? We're all Christians on this call. We're a pluralistic country. 3 of us are Catholics. We're an initiative on Catholic social thought. What are the obligations for people of faith, despite our differences, to uphold democracy and pursue the common good? A short answer from Dennis, and then I know you have to be on your way. And then I'm going to turn to Michael, Cherie, and Christine for answers to those 3 questions that have come in.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked this question because it allows me to correct a misimpression I left, which is I'm in St. Peter, which is where Gustavus Adolphus is, not St. Olaf, but it's still a Lutheran institution.
That's a major ecumenical problem.
Yes, that's for sure. But hey, look, first of all, I'm going to go find what Christine wrote on First Things. I try to get there to read what's happening over there, and I've seen a lot of her other writing. But I think the point you started with in your observation about her writing is, I think, where I would start about people of faith, which is, I think we have to recognize that we're all individuals made in the image of God. We're, as a result, imbued with a dignity that comes with that simple observation. So we should listen. We should listen. And we should listen, recognize that it's in debate that we get closer to the truth. But we should also be confident in pushing back against falsehoods. And just because we want to have debate and want to understand others' perspectives does not mean we should countenance these kind of crazy theories, QAnon and others. There's truth. We should be for it, but we should also we should also, as people of faith, be interested in hearing out and working with people of a variety of perspectives to get to that truth. That doesn't mean we tolerate misinformation, disinformation, or mistruth. And I think that's the challenge we'll find ourselves in, you know, after Tuesday. Thanks so much. It's really, you know how proud I am of you and of Georgetown. But I'm really proud to have been invited to be part of this group. Guess what, John? I think you're still muted.
Stay warm out there, Dennis. Cherie, 3 questions that have come in. Are our institutions strong enough? How do we support them? What does what should we expect from the winner? And thirdly, what are the responsibilities of people of faith?
Well, those are 3 biggies. So I'll sort of just start with the last and really kind of double click on some of what Dennis said, which I think 2 basic places to start for people of faith, which are so basic and yet would really improve matters, is 1, just the principles of 1, love your neighbor, and 2, tell the truth. You know, unpacking what it means to love your neighbor, you know, we could spend many hours on that. I know Catholic social thought has made huge contributions to what that means in practice, but just starting there to recognize our neighbor's dignity doesn't mean we have to agree with them, doesn't mean we have to tolerate lies, but to recognize their dignity as someone made in the image of God, and to acknowledge that we, like they, are fallen creatures, both reflecting God's glory, but bent towards our own self-interest. And that loving our neighbor also requires us to work for the common good, for the pursuit of justice, and for the flourishing of our neighbor as well as ourselves. So that'd be first. Secondly, again, tell the truth seems so basic, but it is one of the things that has really just made our season so much more difficult. And unfortunately, it's not limited to our leaders. It's really, this is a problem that afflicts we the people as well. There have been so many studies that have shown that misinformation on Twitter or on other forms of social media circulate much more quickly than what is true. It's much more likely to go viral. It's much more likely to be passed on. For many of us, there's something just rather delicious about the extreme which confirms our own biases and points. And to simply kind of slow down, be willing to forgo the positive reinforcement that comes on social media from a speedy, superficial, and snarky response. And that is what's so often positively reinforced on our social media, to forgo that kind of fleeting pleasure in pursuit of what's actually accurate. That I think would go a long way in terms of just improving our public discourse. And John, I'm going to have to ask you to refresh my memory on the first 2 questions.
Are our institutions strong enough?
Mm-hmm.
How do we help?
Yes. So our institutions are strong, but our institutions are not invulnerable to sustained assaults upon them. And whether they remain strong is largely up to us. There have been differences. Yuval Levin wrote a wonderful book, The Fractured Republic, which looks at the fact that institutions that used to be morally formative, many of the leaders of them now look at them largely as platforms for their own self-promotion. And so whether institutions stay strong depends on norms and practices that keep them strong. And that is largely up to us.
Thank you. Michael, you're a Republican who's supporting Biden. Assume after a few days it's clear that Biden has won. What should he say to you and to others that have helped provide the margin of victory? And secondly, as a person of faith, what do you say to others about our obligations in this challenging time?
Well, I don't think Joe Biden says anything to me and those who may have endorsed him or support him. I think what he does is he speaks to the country. This is not about an individual endorsement or individual support, or any group of individuals who may support a particular candidate. This is about the expectation that comes with the job of being president of the United States. If Joe Biden wins, whether it's on November 3rd or November 30th, in that moment, he speaks to the country, and he speaks about how he hopes to heal and move the country forward around a lot of things that Cherie just mentioned, putting greater light on things like truth and transparency, elevating science and facts with respect to the pandemic itself, so people can be confident, because we have yet to be confident in anything that's related to this pandemic from its very beginning. I think that's why the nation is so out of sorts right now. So my expectation there is, it ain't about me, it's about the United States. It's about where we are as Americans and where the country has to go, not needs to go, but has to go in the early months of the new year, where we're still going to be dealing with the effects of the pandemic. We're going to still be dealing with social unrest. Just last evening, an African-American male was killed on the streets of Philadelphia by the police. And so these truths and realities won't stop. But the expectation that a president is prepared to address them in an empathetic way, in a humane way, in a leadership way, I think is going to be important for Joe. And I would expect the same of Donald Trump, but I think that past is prologue. So we'll have to as Americans continue to adjust ourselves internally in that instance, in my view. And I think beyond that, as people of faith, one of the things I found the most disturbing over the last quarter century is, and probably even a little bit longer, going back to the 1980 presidential race, when my political hero Ronald Reagan made a bargain with the devil by allowing the then emerging evangelical / political activism into the Republican into the party, and laying that out in the platform of the party, which is the first time the party had taken on social issues like abortion, and then that rolled into other things. When you politicize faith, when you politicize traditions and ideas related to that faith, you get on a very dangerous and slippery slope, which we find ourselves in now, where the president can walk across Lafayette Park and stand in front of a church with a Holy Bible and lift it up as a political prop, and using a church as a political prop backdrop, and make pronouncements. That is not what the founders had in mind. That is not what I think we intend as people. And yet we are finding ourselves on that slippery slope. So people of faith, I think, have to gird ourselves against using our faith as a cudgel against others, as opposed to a means in which we can set an example. Christ only asked us to set an example. He didn't ask us to beat people up. He didn't ask us to jail them. He didn't ask us to persecute them. He just said, live your life as an example of the gospel I'm teaching. And others will see that, and they will either move towards it or away from it. But that's between them and God. That's not between you and them.
Thank you. Christine, you've written about faith and politics and some of the problems of the Democratic Party that in some ways neglecting, some would say even pushing out people of faith. The Biden campaign seems to be going about this in a different way. Let me go back to those questions. One, are our institutions strong enough? What do you want to hear on election night from the winner? And what are the obligations and contributions of people of faith?
So As Cherie said, those are big questions. I think I'm going to try and start with the last one. What should people of faith be thinking, and what are our responsibilities right now? I think the first thing, and to echo some of what Michael Steele was saying, is that people of faith in the United States, at least, need to recognize and hold in our minds and hearts, especially over the next week, that our lives and our salvation do not rely upon the political climate or the domination of our political leadership in certain domains. No political leader in the United States has the ability to hurt God and hurt the Bible, as President Trump said about Joe Biden, or end Christianity in some way as we know it, or otherwise defeat our Savior if we are in fact real Christians. As the pastor and theologian John Piper put it very eloquently last week, we need to remember that the greatest issue in our lives and for our faith is not saving America and its earthly benefits. The greatest issue for our faith, in fact, should be exalting Christ, full stop, no matter what happens. And then I'll also echo Cherie here too, with a statement that I think loving our neighbor is, one of the perhaps hardest right now, but most important thing that we can do as individuals and ask our leadership to do in the next few weeks. There are still many things that can bring us together right now. And actually, we have seen that especially in this pandemic. We do have common worries and we do have some shared understanding of the common good, even if we're coming from different sides of the political spectrum. So yes, in some ways, COVID has even made this clearer. Americans, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or something else entirely, still care about their families. They care about their children's health. They care about their kids' education. They would like to have jobs to be able to support themselves and their families. We do actually, in our different ways, care about our country. We want to see it continue in unity, I think, not in division, not in civil war. And we all, being very Catholic here, understand on some level the principle of subsidiarity, that there are great political questions happening, that the election is happening on a high level. But in the end, we will have to deal with many of these things close to home. We're going to have to talk about and deny the QAnon theory, in our families around the Thanksgiving table. We'll have to talk about these issues in our neighborhoods and communities. The protests for racial justice have been taking place in some cases outside of our front doors. So whether our candidate wins or loses, the place to start will be loving the people closest to us and around us and spreading that love and hopefully continuity from there. Muted.
My last question is, what should the people watching this take away from it, and what should they actually do? And the thing I'm going to take away is I need to unmute myself every time. This has been quite profound and even moving in the middle of this tough time. I mean, pandemic, racial injustice, economic crisis. People are watching and they're thinking, what can I do? So beyond voting, and everybody said, make a plan, vote your conscience. What should people be thinking and doing? We give great advice to others. What is the advice we need for ourselves? Cherie, can you give us, what should we be doing?
Sure, a few things. Let's just start with the very practical one. I think we should give attention to our social media feeds and the way that we communicate with others. All of us there, we make many decisions every day about how we communicate the information we spread or the misinformation that we spread, and just simply being a good steward of our own ways of communicating with the world would be one. Secondly, I think, acting locally is a great thing. Getting involved in our neighborhoods, in the embodied and messy work of working through problems and issues on the local level, I think is so helpful. And third, I would just put out there, this would be something for people to think about on their own, creative ways of loving your neighbor. I think it was the poet Auden who said, love your crooked neighbor with all your crooked heart. And what that looks like in our various neighborhoods and spheres will differ. But it's a worthy question of giving creative and prayerful consideration to in terms of what it looks like. Might be on mute.
Christine? Christine,
Yes. So
what should we be doing?
well, I was going to say that I loved Cherie's suggestion about monitoring our social media feeds and what we listen to. I would honestly go further and say that if it's possible, just log off. There's not a lot that social media is going to be doing for us in the next few days. It's likely that there will be a lot of misinformation. It's also simply likely that people will just be afraid, and speaking from a place of fear, fanning flames, whether intentionally or non-intentionally. For our own mental health and to prevent some of this spread, perhaps one of the best things that we could do is just not take part. We should vote and do our part, and then we should be quiet. I think that perhaps one of the next things that we could do individually is to prepare ourselves for either outcome, whether a candidate wins or loses. I think that there are some human impulses that we want to gird ourselves against. I think that there's already, sort of a jonesing for revenge of some kind to get back at the side that harmed you. There's, looking forward to a sort of schadenfreude, to making fun of the loser, to finally, feeling secure in our own domination and going from there. These are not healthy impulses in the best of times, and they're certainly not, the impulses that Christians should be indulging. And so we should, try and think about and become aware of when those feelings arise in ourselves, and how we also act those out, whether it is, again, on social media, in our conversations, or simply in the ruminations that we'll be having as we wait and worry and wonder over the next few days. We can't always stop these things in their tracks, but at least we can try. And in their place, perhaps we can actually cultivate, again, an understanding of hope, a belief that, our community members and our neighbors, even if we disagree with them, still do have things in common with us, and that we are in fact looking forward to a common good that we can all share and go from there.
Michael, aside from listening to the Michael Steele podcast, what should we be doing?
I like when you do that. So I'm going to come at this a little bit differently, probably a little bit more aggressive than one may expect. So I take what my colleagues on this panel have said, what Christine and Cherie have said. So take that, folks. Take what they've just said, because they've just laid it out. I can't really add to that except this way. Ask yourself, why are you so pissed? What are you angry about? Why are you so fearful of other? What's driving that? Because that gets to the heart and the soul of all of this. This is, it's not about Donald Trump. We were angry and ticked off long before Donald Trump showed up. What are you so afraid of? What is it about this country that you're afraid of the change that you see? What is it about your neighbor and your neighborhood that's making you so angry? When you go to the Walmart and you see someone there, what is it that you feel in your gut? Because that's what you got to get at. All this other stuff, you're projecting. Stop projecting, turn the mirror, look at it, and face that. Because that's where it is. We are the country, and the country reflects us. Our leaders reflect us. So we can put it off. I can put it off on Cherie. I can put it off on Christine. I can put it off on John. But at the end of the day, it's still me. It's still about what it is that's animating my angers, my fears, my frustrations. and take all of that seriously into heart, and then do the things that you've just heard. Pray on it, reflect on it, turn off the Twitter account for 24 hours, step away from the moment and understand exactly how you want to be in this space and how you want to act as you consider your neighbor, because that's the only way we really begin to get at this. And I think if we start with that internal reflection, then we can project out externally the gospel and everything else that comes from that.
Michael, I hate you. I'm really good at judging others. The idea I should examine my own conscience is very challenging. The only thing my family and my colleagues agree on 100% is I should not be on Twitter. And I think I've learned something about that. I just want to say, I forget who, it was Sylvia Munoz who said, I have been living in this country for almost 60 years. This is the first time I have felt fearful in an election. I came into this full of fear, and those fears have not gone away. But with Dennis and with Joe and with Michael and Christine and Cherie, I have found sources of hope. And they give me confidence in our country, but they give me confidence in each other, and even a little confidence in myself. We did a session a week ago. It seems like we do one of these every week. And we actually had people, a Catholic voting for Trump, Catholic voting for Biden. And some people said we shouldn't have that. We were providing a forum for the unthinkable for different reasons. But somebody said, it was a headline actually, that said, dialogue, don't demonize. And I think part of what we've heard today is whatever happens, dialogue, don't demonize. Mark Shields has another way of putting it. It's one of my favorite lines. He says, you can tell the health of a political party, of a country, or a church by whether they're looking for converts or they're attacking heretics. This is a time for conversion at every sense of that word. I want to thank our colleagues at the Institute for Politics and Public Service. I want to thank Chris Crawford and Joe and our friends at the Democracy Fund. I want to thank the people who helped put this on the air. I especially want to thank Anna Misla and Kim, my colleagues, who work so diligently every day to provide an alternative perspective and voice in the middle of so much division. We are going to have our post-election dialogue, Faith in the Faithful, in the 2020 election. To be on the safe side, we're having it on Tuesday, the 10th, a week after the election. It may be a report on the results, or it may be a status report. And we're going to have the journalists and experts who know the most about the intersection of faith and politics. Look at our website for the specifics. But for now, vote your conscience, build bridges, not walls, dialogue, don't demonize, and join me in thanking our wonderful participants today, Michael, Christine, Cherie, Dennis, and Joe. Thank you very much for joining us. God bless you.